Hello and welcome back to another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Eric. I did 11 years in prison and I talk about prison stuff. Today I'm talking about things that are hard to adjust to when you're first getting out of prison, especially after you've been in for a long time. So be sure to like and subscribe. Big shout out to my Patreon patrons, Kenneth Iman and Brian Kitchens. Let's get into the video. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is crowds. And some of these are a little bit interconnected, you'll see, or related. But I definitely want to talk about crowds first off. And there's a reason why crowds are hard to adjust to when you first get out of prison. And the reason for that is because when things go down in prison, it usually happens during a time of mass movement. Mass movements are when a lot of people are moving across the prison at once. You know, we're talking like chow time or when they call yard or programs. You know, if you have a church program you go to or a religious program, you'll have a whole bunch of people out moving from different cell houses to the programs area, or during chow time, you'll have a bunch of different cell houses going to chow, yard, etc., you know? And let's say you're in one cell house, and a cell house is basically just a building with a bunch of cells in it, right? It is what it sounds like. But let's say you're in one cell house and there's a dude in a different cell house who has beef with you. He's not going to be able to just waltz in your cell house and, you know, get into it with you. That's just not how it's going to go down. Or if there's a planned assault from several people in a certain group and they have a target in a certain cell house, they can't just walk over to the cell house, walk in there and take out their target. It just doesn't happen that way. So they have to get them during a mass movement, when people are going to the chow hall or something like that, when both of those cell houses are going to be moving across the prison at the same time. That's when they will try to get at them. So usually in a mass movement scenario, that's when you see your crowds. That's when you see several cell houses out at the same time. So crowds require you to be on high alert. You know, you got to keep your head on a swivel because anything can happen when you have a bunch of different cell houses, a bunch of different units out on the yard at the same time. And it doesn't have to be a situation with you. It could be a situation with someone else. You know, if the guy next to you is getting beat up or a fight is about to break out in your immediate area, you're probably going to get hit with pepper spray just because you're close by, or at least you're going to be, you know, affected by the pepper spray. So crowds require you to be in a heightened state of awareness. You know, you're checking around in your immediate surroundings, making sure nothing's going to kick off, and if something does look like it's going to kick off, you want to distance yourself from that. So usually when you first get out of prison and you're around crowds, it can be a little bit overwhelming because you're really tense. You're on the lookout for trouble. And the next one, and this is related to crowds, but it's not just about crowds, but the next one that is hard to adjust to is going to the store. You know, in prison, you don't have a lot of options on what you can buy or anything like that. And you get to the store and there's just stuff everywhere. And it's kind of crazy. You know, you're not used to it. And it can be a little bit hard to process. And, you know, when I got out and I was shopping for my food and stuff, it was just crazy. You know, I never had so many options that I could remember. You know, it's not like I was in prison since birth, so clearly I had options at one point. But it was so long ago, you know, it was just overwhelming. And so that can be hard to adjust to at first. And then you have the other aspect of going to a store, and that is there are people around everywhere, you know, and they're just going about their daily lives, but you're kind of tense, you're kind of anxious, you're, you know, on high alert because there's people everywhere. And then on top of it, you have to deal with, you know, all these choices of things that you can buy, and it feels a little bit weird. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just hard to adjust to, you know, you're not used to it. The same thing happens with the next one that I'm going to talk about, which is going out to eat. To this day, if I go to a drive-thru, I almost order the same thing every time because I don't like going through the menu. it's really hard for me to make a choice because there's so many options. And, I don't know if this is good. I don't know if that's good. I don't even know what that is. It can be a little bit overwhelming and hard to get used to. Like I said, to this day, I will either get the same thing every time I go to a restaurant, or I will just order what someone else is ordering. If my wife is getting something, she'll order before me, and I'll just be like, hey, I'll just get that, especially if it's a restaurant that I'm not familiar with. Another one that is hard to get used to, something that, requires a little bit of adjustment, and a lot of these are things that will cause you a little bit of anxiety when you first get out. And this isn't all true for everybody. Everybody's different. Some people can deal with this stuff just fine, and other people have a little bit more of a hard time with it. But another thing that is hard to adjust to is open spaces. When I was in Lansing, there's these big limestone walls around the place. You can't even see the horizon. And even in El Dorado, they have so much razor wire on the fences, you can't really make out a lot of stuff that's outside the fence. You can see fields, basically, because there's nothing around the prison. And, they discourage you from going over to the fence and peering through to the other side. You're supposed to say, I think you're supposed to be 20 feet away from the fence at all times. When you get out and you have all these open spaces and people are just walking around everywhere, and you can see the sky, you can see the horizon, you can see stuff off in the distance, it can be kind of weird. And, a little bit overwhelming. But it's also exciting. It also feels nice. You know what I mean? One that was really hard for me to get used to when I first got out, and this was weird for me, but cars, riding in cars is tough to get used to if you've been locked up for a while. When I was in El Dorado, I was there from 2008 to 2015, late 2015. And during that time frame, I did not ride in a motor vehicle. So in 2015, I got transferred to Winfield. And when I was in Winfield, I was on a road crew. So I rode in a van every day. And even then, that took me a lot of getting used to. And I wasn't quite there yet. Then I go to Lansing for a couple of years. Once again, not in a motor vehicle at all. And when I first got out of prison, I used to get motion sick whenever I would be riding in a vehicle for X amount of time. It would be kind of difficult for me. And it's not that I didn't like riding in cars, because I love cars. I love going for a drive or something, just getting away from stuff. But when you're not used to riding in cars, sometimes you'll get motion sick, and that was the case with me. I used to get pretty sick to my stomach when I first got out. One of the biggest things that is hard to adjust to when you're first getting out of prison, after you do a while inside, is the culture shock. People operate very differently out here than they do in prison, and that's a good thing. But it's also hard to get used to because you get conditioned to respond to certain situations certain ways. Respect is a big deal in prison. There are certain things that you don't say, even playing. When I first got out, probably within a month of being out, I saw two grown men get into a pretty heated argument, and they were throwing insults at each other, calling each other bitches and stuff like this. And that would never happen in prison without blows being thrown. You would be fighting immediately. There would be a fight. But these guys just screamed at each other, called each other very disrespectful names, and then they walked separate ways. And I was astounded. When I first got out of prison, respect was still a really big deal. And it still is a really big deal to me. But on the other hand, I can't play by the same rules that I played by in prison. If someone disrespects you, you can't just go putting your hands on people because you don't like something that they said. That's not the way the free world works. It might go that way in prison, but it's not how it works out here. So that is hard to adjust to. You kind of have to recondition yourself and learn how to let little things go. And that can be pretty challenging for someone who's been in for a while. Another one that's hard to adjust to, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about this, people who've been to prison and stuff that are on YouTube. This is one that I don't hear a lot. But food is very, very hard to adjust to, and I don't mean just the options, although that is a part of it. A big part of adjusting to the food is getting your gut squared away. When you first go to prison, your body has to adjust to that food. It's rough. It will tear you up. It'll make you all sorts of sick. And then when you get out and you've been eating all this processed trash food that they feed you when you're in the system, your body's used to that. And you get some real food in you with grease included, man, your body is just like, it feels all warm and fuzzy and a little bit bogged down and stuff. And you get bubble gut, but we're not going to get into that. Well, you can use your imagination for that one, but you understand what I'm getting at. The food is not easy to adjust to. And there's still some stuff that I have not been able to adjust to. And there's that, and then there's other elements to it, right? So when I was in prison, there were just certain trays that were horrible. American goulash was the first tray that I got when I was in prison. I took one bite of it and I started throwing up. It was bad. And it smelled like roadkill. It wasn't good. There was nothing about that tray that was good. It didn't look good. It didn't taste good. It didn't have a good texture. It didn't smell good. And you're going to run into foods on the streets that prison basically ruined for you. You're never going to want to touch that again. It might be fantastic food. There's folks out here on the streets that probably make a beautiful American goulash, but I can promise you I'm not eating it. I will take your word at it, and I will eat a burger, because that's hard to mess up. But I think you get what I'm getting at. The next thing that is really hard to adjust to is isolation. And that might seem weird that you are in prison and then you get out and you feel more isolated. But the reality of it is you kind of are, because you're walking around with all these memories of a really rough place. All the people around you, they haven't experienced the things that you've experienced. They're not from the prison culture that you just came from. They are operating on a different set of social expectations, a different set of rules, a way of living that you're not familiar with. And no one seems to get it. So you feel very alone. But then there's other little things that make you feel more isolated. Not just the fact that you're basically kind of going to a different world. There's the aspect of interactions are different. And this was a big one for me because smartphones weren't really a big thing when I got locked up. I think they came out around the same time I got locked up. I got locked up in '07. I don't remember when the iPhone came out. Because, when I was out, flip phones were still the common thing. But social media wasn't everywhere. When people would get together, they would, call each other up and say, "Hey, man, what are you doing? Are you at your house right now? What's happening? You want to hang out?" And then you would drive over to their house and you would hang out in person. People didn't really interact on social media. It wasn't really a big thing. Social media was like Yahoo Chat or Yahoo Instant Messenger or AOL Instant Messenger or something like that, one of those. It wasn't what it is now. And now everything seems to be kind of topsy-turvy from that. People will interact on social media quite a bit, but they're not as quick to go actually hang out or actually do something together. And in prison, you don't have any social media, if you're minding your P's and Q's. Granted, there are people that get cell phones in prison and they're on social media, but this is not about that. What I'm talking about is, if you're trying to hang out with your buddies in prison, there's only certain situations where you can do that in, when you're going out to yard in the weight pit, or if you're going to a religious call out, or you're sitting together at chow, maybe you're in a self-help program together. The point is, you're doing things together. When you're hanging out with your friends, you're actually doing things together. You're actually having conversations in real time. You're not shooting messages back and forth or commenting on some social media post or something like that. So since people aren't actually going and doing things with each other and hanging out and stuff, it can be hard to make that adjustment. And you can feel isolated. Another one that is difficult to adjust to is quiet. And once again, this might seem kind of weird, but prison is a very loud place. It's rarely quiet unless, it's a long time after lockdown or something. But some prisons just generally don't get very quiet, even at night when everybody's asleep. A lot of folks don't have TVs. They don't have things to do. They don't have jobs. So they'll sleep all day and they'll stay up all night yelling back and forth to their buddies or something like that. And then during the day, it's just never quiet. You have people yelling from cell to cell. You have people down in the day room slapping cards against the table, yelling at each other or yelling at the TV if there's a game on. The chow hall is absolutely, it's loud. It's very loud. The yard's very loud. You have plates clanging, you have people hollering back and forth. It's just a very loud place. Even if people aren't talking, it's still loud in prison because you have exhaust fans, you have fans down in the day room, you have showers running, you can hear some guy's TV a cell or two over. It's just not quiet. In prison, usually the only time it gets quiet is right before something kicks off. And that's because the prisoners know something is kicking off and they're all paying attention to this area where it's going to happen. If I know person A and person B are going to be getting into it, or group A and group B are going to be getting into it at yard, I'm going to stay away from that area and I'm going to be aware of what's going on over there. I'm not going to be caught up paying attention to my buddy's conversation. I'm going to shut up. He's going to shut up. We're going to be minding our own business, but, out of the corner of our eye, we're going to be paying attention to what's going on over here because we don't want to get dragged into it. Or maybe you're just, you want to make sure that what's going to happen over there isn't going to spill out over here, or you want to make sure maybe if a friend is involved or one of the people involved, you might be watching to make sure it's not going to be a 3-on-1. Maybe you have a reason for watching. Maybe that's your business. You're supposed to mind your business in prison, but you also have to be aware of your surroundings. You don't want to get hit by pepper spray that wasn't meant for you. And, you don't want to get hit by pepper spray that is meant for you either, but that's beside the point. The point is, people will be quiet so they can pay attention to what's going on and make sure they don't get dragged into it. So when you're on the streets and everything is quiet, it can make your anxiety go up because you feel like something bad is about to happen. You get that feeling of impending doom, you know what I mean? Or you'll just be hypervigilant. And that is the next one and the last one that I want to talk about. And that is paranoia or hypervigilance or tension in general. If you live in a very chaotic environment for a long time that is violent and dangerous, you learn to keep your head on a swivel and be aware of your surroundings and be ready just in case something bad happens. Because in prison, all sorts of stuff can happen to anybody at any time. Even if you're someone who lives according to the social expectations of the prison culture, you can still get messed up. You might make the wrong person mad and maybe they're going to try to do something, or maybe they're going to pay someone to do something to you. and you'll never know it's coming until it's too late. So you kind of make yourself prepared. You practice preparedness. You know, like you're not paranoid to the extent that you're scared. You're just prepared. You know, you're on the lookout for things to go south. And you always have to be ready to go if it comes to that, you know. So that can be hard to adjust to and get to a spot where you're not hypervigilant all the time and you're not tense, you know. That's hard to get over. It's hard to get to a spot where you can just kind of relax and feel comfortable in whatever environment you're in out here. Anyway, I hope you guys like this video. I will see you guys in the next one. I appreciate y'all. I'm Eric. This has been another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I will see you all later.